Hi everybody, welcome to the Azure On Air podcast. This week we're at the Integrate Summit and there's lots of really cool sessions going on at the minute, and it's a great opportunity for me to grab people from Microsoft to join us on the podcast to talk about some of the good things going on. So today I'm joined by Mike Budzynski from the API Management team. Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. What I'd like to do, Mike, I'd just like to kind of get to know you a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what your journey's been with Microsoft and what you do for the API Management team.
Right, so I'm a senior product manager for Azure API Management. I've been on that team for probably over 5 years now. Before that, I actually used to be a software engineer. I worked on Azure Log Analytics and Azure Governance. And yeah, I'm probably the tallest person in Microsoft.
Mike is for anybody who can't appreciate on the camera, Mike is very, very tall. So Mike, what areas have you worked in, or what features have been your kind of key areas with API management?
Right, so over the years, I've worked on different product areas, so I pretty much know the product end to end. I used to work a lot on the developer portal, sort of the control plane capabilities. We also launched Azure API Center Preview, which is now taken over by some other people so that it can develop more and better and faster. Right now, I'm focusing on all the API governance aspects. That includes Workspaces, which I will probably talk a bit more about in a few minutes. Also API security, which is our integration of Microsoft Defender for APIs, part of Defender for Cloud, and a few other areas adjacent to these capabilities.
Yeah. So what do you see in that governance area that has been some of the biggest challenges customers face for governance?
Right. So over the past years, we've seen different models of managing APIs within organizations. One of those models that we saw was sort of like a centralized model where customers deploy a single API management service for the whole organization. They have teams collaborating within that single API management service, but because we didn't provide enough control plane and data plane isolation features, those teams started running into issues, conflicts. Some people were using the same entities, resources for configuring their APIs, some people causing troubles when it comes to runtime for other people. CI/CD pipelines started becoming like a spaghetti mess. So especially for large organizations, we saw them migrate to a siloed API management model. And the siloed API management model means that each team has its own API management service. But then the problem becomes that, if you have 50 or 100 teams, you have 100 API management services. And you still have a central API platform team who oversees those 100 API management services. But because of that fragmentation, you cannot really apply unified governance, meaning enforcement of certain behaviors or even API design, as well as it's very hard to maintain that whole fleet of API management services. Or provide even a unified API discovery within the organization to find the APIs by developers to consume. So the evolution of that is the federated API management model, which means that you have a single API management service in our case that is divided into multiple teams with proper segregation of control plane and API runtime. And because it's a single API management service, it means that there is a single plane for the platform team to govern also, and also a single unified developer portal. So that approach provides the benefits of both siloed and centralized API management model without their downsides. And our approach is to enable that federated API management model with Workspaces. So Workspaces have been in preview for around a year now, and they're soon going to become generally available. Workspaces basically provide that workspace for each API team in your organization to control their own resources like APIs, named values, products, subscriptions to the products. So give API teams full autonomy to develop and manage and evolve APIs and productize them, publish them to consumers, while the API platform team maintains the whole, centralized governance plane and can still apply certain policies for runtime, unified monitoring, unified developer portal. What's new in Workspaces is that we are now adding the ability to segregate API runtime as well. So not only control plane, but also data plane of APIs. And that's to avoid issues where a single API management team causes, for example, resource starvation of gateways for another API team, and they're not even able to troubleshoot which team is causing the issues because there is no way to attribute resource consumption to APIs per process. So our plan is to provide runtime isolation, runtime segregation, first with dedicated gateways per team, but after that we're going to add the ability to deploy multiple workspaces on a shared gateway, but there will still be process isolation, process segregation between the teams, between the workspaces.
So I think that's really interesting for me, Mike, listening to you describe that, because I think if I think about my journey with API management and following the product for a number of years, it's great to see all the technical features coming, but the thing that really resonates for me, and I hope customers pick this up too, is that there's a lot of thinking going into how does a customer be successful with API management, which it's far more than just the product and the features it does. It's about how you would use the product. So it's quite interesting to hear you describe the kind of siloed approach versus the centralized approach, and then recognize there's problems with both. And I guess your idea is the federated approach is a bit more of like a combination, maximizing the flexibility of the silo with the governance required by the central. I think that's quite interesting.
Exactly. In general, like you said, we provide a lot of features and capabilities to allow customers to implement API management. So our tool, our product is very flexible, but because of that, there is also some complexity to that product. So it's good to talk about the best practices, how to use it, or certain use cases, how we want to use API management for very specific use cases and scenarios. And we also try to abstract that complexity through user interface and through tooling that we provide as part of the product as well.
So what about things, you mentioned, Mike, in your career, you've worked a bit with a developer portal side of API management. How does that play into the sort of federated model? Do you see customers having multiple different developer portals for different end consumers, or?
Right, it really depends. In most cases, what we see is customers want a single developer portal, especially for internal API consumption. So organization-wide developer portal for internal consumption of APIs, regardless of which team you belong to as part of like API development or from API consumption perspective. You should be able to reuse other teams' APIs.
Yeah.
So that's where that unified developer portal comes into play. You can still control the visibility of APIs in the developer portal, whether or not they're inside workspaces, but having that ability to discover and consume all the APIs, if you want to enable that option, is really important for most customers.
So with yourself, Mike, what things excite you on the roadmap for API management over the coming months?
Right. I think, API management is extremely uniquely positioned as a product because we deal with APIs, and APIs are the interface. So whatever innovation is happening in the industry, we are sort of always somehow in the middle of it because we provide those interfaces for consumption of certain services, technologies. My colleague will talk to it a little bit more about generative AI. But because of that, I think API management constantly evolves. So we keep adding features, we keep evolving, we keep adapting. I think that's extremely exciting. So that new model with Workspace, I think, is certainly one of the biggest changes of the whole platform in many years. We also launched API management pricing tiers V2. Basic and standard V2 are now generally available for use in production. Those new tiers rely on new infrastructure that scales faster, is faster to provision, is more performant. It's modern infrastructure for the next decade or so. And they also offer cost benefits as well, meaning that some of the features like private networking is brought into lower tiers of the API management service. So if you want to use API management service with VNet configurations, you can now do it even in the standard V2 tier. You don't have to use premium tiers for that.
I think that's a big win for a lot of customers, isn't it? Those sort of network, over the years, networking's become such a more important thing for customers, and I think offering that at a more sort of affordable price tier brings a lot of customers into that.
Right. I think what really becomes much more important is the security. Networking is just one way of implementing that security. In terms of security, the proper security is to have a layered approach to security. So API management provides a lot of different features to enable security for APIs with, for example, policies like IP filtering, authentication policies, certificates and all of this, like TLS and Cipher and protocol settings. But also you can integrate API Management with various services like VNets, Application Gateway, Front Door, Azure Web Application Firewall. And first and foremost, we now have a dedicated service to security, which is called Microsoft Defender for Cloud, specifically Defender for APIs plan. Defender for APIs provides very advanced security features for APIs, especially in API management. So it allows you to view a unified security overview of all your APIs across API management services. It analyzes the security posture of your APIs, for example, to make sure that none of your APIs are exposed through unencrypted protocols like HTTP versus HTTPS. It also is able to detect APIs that are dormant, so don't receive any traffic and shouldn't necessarily be around because they're not used, so they just increase the attack surface. It's also able to detect APIs that are not authenticated. So for example, you forget to enable authentication in place and you see there is some consumption of APIs without an authentication method happening. That's not good in most cases.
So I think if I just kind of dig deeper on that point, so I think this may be something people would want to sort of have a bit of clarity on. So when we think about our API management service, we've talked a bit about network integration for the outbound traffic coming from APIM to another service. And I guess traffic coming into your API management, there's different things customers do, like front door might proxy API management, and something like a load balancer might sit in front. Do you have any kind of thoughts on the different choices a customer might make? So where would you choose front door? Where might you use an app gateway and that kind of thing? Is that?
Well, front door and app gateway, there are different products, so they provide different capabilities. From the standpoint of security, they provide similar capabilities, meaning that they both have web application firewall built into them. But front door provides with acceleration of data and requests because it's distributed globally. There's some caching, etc. So it's faster. In many cases, application gateway is more of a standardized, networking proxy. So it really is up to customers, and I believe front door does not integrate with VNets. There is private link option available, while application gateway, I believe you can inject into VNets.
So really we've got kind of the outbound security, the inbound security, and then I guess from what you described, Defender's almost like a guardian who's kind of looking at what you're doing.
Right. So Defender is not in the line of request. Defender API Management actually, once enabled Defender, API Management forwards the traffic to Defender for analysis with machine learning models.
Right.
So it's not in the line of request, but Defender helps you detect issues with your APIs, whether they are part of configuration or whether they are part of API behavior and traffic. And then you mitigate or you remediate those issues in API Management. And a few other things about Defender is also able to classify data. So it's able to identify APIs that expose social security numbers or credit card numbers.
Okay.
And that information can be used for prioritization of risk remediation. So if you see that there are certain, let's say 10 or 20 security alerts happening, you can prioritize them based on whether an API exposes sensitive data. Or who consumes that API, what sort of backend services are behind this API.
So I guess that really kind of comes back to that fragmented model, doesn't it? Where if I've got different development teams building APIs, my Defender can help me as the centralized person check who might be using sensitive data in which APIs to give good governance on that. So
these are usually security teams, which are different than API teams. So it's usually part of a security organization within a company that oversees all the security issues, and they usually interact with Defender. However, we do expose those insights also directly in API management, so you can see them as part of the API management experience. So they're also available to both platform owners and API teams who develop APIs. And last thing about Defender, just to finish that note, of course, the most powerful capability of Defender is to analyze traffic. So we have, I believe, over 10 or even 20 machine learning models trained specifically for certain API behaviors, such as brute force or data enumeration attacks, so that your API stays secure. And Defender can detect those, can notify you, can alert you, and it also can help prioritize you those issues. But you remediate them in API management, whether it's by revoking access to an API, or whether it's by blocking certain users' IP addresses, or even just bringing that API down. In certain cases, you just want to react fast. maybe it's the best approach in some cases.
So one question I think listeners might be wondering about would be API Center and Workspaces. So to me, at a really high level, they sound quite similar. What's the differences, and where does one come into play versus the other?
APIs and Workspaces?
API Center and then Workspaces within API Management.
Yeah, right. So we, disregarding Workspaces for a minute, APIs are sort of a child resource of API management. So you have an API management service where you can have, 1, 5, or 1,000 APIs, and that's the, data model we've had for many years now. With Workspaces, Workspaces also contain APIs. So now if you wish to use Workspaces, a lot of these resource types that were previously available on the API management service level are now part of the Workspaces.
Yeah.
So APIs are also within Workspaces. So our products and subscriptions to those products. So our certain certificates or backend resources or named values. So anything that helps you create, manage, and evolve APIs is within the Workspaces. And as a platform owner, you configure control plane access for a specific workspace with built-in or custom roles in Azure. So you can give people permissions to edit APIs within a specific workspace.
So that really is more Workspaces about the developer and the operations experience from the way you describe that. So with API Center, then how does that correlate to how you've described Workspaces?
Right. So API Center is a different product, different service. It's mostly for management and governance and inventory of APIs across multiple API management services. Right. Or across multiple API management platforms from different vendors, or even for APIs that are not managed in an API management platform. So you can think of API management from the standpoint of API management of runtime. With API Center, you can ingest APIs that don't even have runtime yet, or that runtime is outside our Azure API Management service. So that helps you create that central inventory and governance plane, and also discovery for APIs across different lifecycle stages, even retired APIs that may not even have runtime, across different API management solutions and platforms, or just multiple API management services, and also APIs of types that Azure API Management may not support, because we support just certain types that we support runtime for. With API Center, you can just upload any text specification of an API, and there's your API.
Yeah. So I guess from how you describe that, and so that whole discovery and catalog experience, I guess for Integrate, if we've got listeners here who maybe build integration solutions, but for some, I do know of some customers who have a different vendor's API management product, but actually they could still use API Center with that other product, and even for the third-party APIs they integrate with.
You don't have to have Azure API Management to have API Center. If you have both, API Center integrates with Azure API Management for import of API inventory, so that's easier for you. And this is mostly, a lot of companies have legacy API management solutions that maybe run on-prem, have been there for 20 years. Some organizations are growing rapidly, and they have they don't have any specific policy around adoption of API management services. So some teams have API management services from Microsoft Azure, other teams have from different companies, different vendors. So API Center helps you harness all that chaos of APIs within your organization.
So for you, Mike, then personally, when you sort of understand the challenges that customers face, what's the next thing in the API management world that you think the team's going to be tackling that customers are telling you is the next problem to face?
Right. That's really hard to answer, because I don't think we can generalize. There are customers have very different use cases. I think maybe part of what's happening is that API management solutions sort of branch out to different specializations. Definitely one of them will be a mediation of generative AI requests, and in the future probably more AI models, whatever interfaces come along. Another thing is we, for example, added gRPC protocol support for those customers who use high performance gRPC protocol for microservices traffic. We are also working on a new gateway offering for cloud solutions. So you will be able to use a new gateway developed by us for cloud workloads, like natively in the Azure cloud. So I think that will be exciting for some customers. And I think we'll see more features around security and governance as well as along the way, because that's top of mind for many large enterprise customers.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us today. It's really great to hear how far API management's come over the last few years, and the team's gone from strength to strength, in my opinion. And we really appreciate the involvement you guys have had at the Integrate Summit, because there's always been some great sessions, and you share a lot of announcements and experiences with the people here. So thank you for joining us on the podcast today, and I hope we can get some more sessions with other people from your team and yourself in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, you too.